Now, I know smack about Donald Trump's environmental perspective or his. I mean, I know that he's got some skepticisms about global warming, and at least in terms of its priority and so on. But I will tell you this: this is how, sort of outside the box is important to think. Um, let's say Donald Trump gets his wish, and we get like three, or Americans get like three different levels of taxation, right?
Right.
You fill it out on the back of a postage stamp, and it takes you 20 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how good that is for the environment?
Right.
No, seriously, think about it. How good is that for the environment? Tell me.
Yeah, I mean, you're saving a lot in resources when it comes to, I guess, trees and ink and printers, and the people at H&R Block aren't going to do so well.
Right. So that can be so yeah, I mean, the accountants all driving back and forth, people printing stuff out, people trying to figure stuff out, people burning the midnight oil, staying up late, running their computers, reprinting stuff out. I mean, just something like that. Boom. Simplify the tax code. Hell, if they simplify the tax code, you don't need 200 volumes to be printed every 6 months for whatever the tax code. I mean, just think of how helpful that is for the trees. So as far as all that goes, now, if you can get environmental protection without the EPA, then the EPA is bad for the environment, because the EPA has to heat their buildings. The people got to drive to work. They got to use a lot of paper, electricity, air conditioning, you name it, right? So if you can get environmental protection without the EPA, which came in under Nixon in the early 70s. I mean, it wasn't like America was on fire beforehand. And so if he can get rid of the EPA, fantastic. As long as you can still get environmental protection, I think you'll get better environmental protection. Here's what happens. So everybody wants a clean environment, and that was already happening, right? The air was cleaner, the water was cleaner, the groundwater was cleaner, the soil was cleaner, because people want a clean environment. And there's a transition from medievalism to a modern economy called the Industrial Revolution, where things are kind of crappy, but they're still better than they were before. Right. So people say, oh, well, there was all this soot and people died early of black lung in the smog of the Industrial Revolution. And it's like, yes, they still lived longer than they did in the Middle Ages. The pollution is more obvious because you can see soot. You can't see cholera. Right. So the transition from the medieval world to the industrial world was a huge detoxification of the environment, because they got better sanitation, they got more soap, they got better meals, people's wages doubled, they got more protein, they got more meat, and so on, right? So that's, again, comparing this to some pristine, magical, this is the Garden of Eden fallacy that is very common. I'm not saying Europe, but a lot of people have this kind of stuff. How about this? How about Donald Trump brings a lot of troops home? America has, 720 plus military bases around the world. Donald Trump brings a whole bunch of troops home. How's that for the environment?
Right.
How about he doesn't go and invade another country? How good was the war in Iraq for the environment? I mean, the empire is disastrous for the environment, but that particular form of really vicious imperialism, where up to 1 million people died in Iraq, and they depleted uranium shells and destroyed the water infrastructure and the water treatment plants and so on. I mean, you bomb one water treatment plant, you've turned water into a bioweapon, as has happened many times in these kinds of conflicts. So if Donald Trump had his way in 2003, America would not have gone to war in Iraq. Now, this is going to sound cold and callous, but just from a pure environmental standpoint, you have a kid, you raise a kid, you feed that kid, and if that kid at the age of 18 just gets blown up, that is a huge net loss, because you've poured all of this environmental resources into this kid who dies. Same thing with the American troops, same thing with the adults. Boom, dead. Okay, maybe you'll save a little money on old age pensions. But from a pure material standpoint, I mean, war is horrendous morally, war is horrendous from a variety of standpoints, and it's horrendous for our freedoms. But the environmental waste of pouring resources into children who then die, And they may die directly or they may die indirectly because they can't get clean water because the infrastructure's been bombed and so on. If he just brings the troops home, simplifies the tax code, and allows the courts to properly deal with environmental issues the way that they were supposed to, right? The reason why the EPA had to come in is because the government paralyzed the ability of courts to deal with pollution issues because big corporations donate a lot more money than small people. And so the corporations are the ones who managed to cripple the court's ability to deal with environmental issues. And then because the government was interfering with that, you need another giant government program called the EPA to deal with the last clusterfrack of government programs. All the while that there's all of this excess money being printed and borrowed, which drives massive environmental consumption in the present at the expense of the future. So the government can't solve a goddamn thing. And the initiation of force is always going to produce, in the end, the opposite of what you claim to want. And so these are just off the top of my head. These are things that are going to be vastly better. I'll give you one other, just while I'm sort of mulling it over.
Okay, great.
So Donald Trump wants to, this I know for sure, he wants to do a lot to stimulate domestic production. People they get so mad that Donald Trump, he builds his ties, they're all put together overseas and so on. Yeah, so what? In apparel, only 3% of it is made in America anyway. So, it's not like he's some big exception to the rule. But let's say that Donald Trump, by hook or by crook, doing whatever he does, he's able to stimulate domestic demand at the expense of offshoring. What effect is that going to have on the environment?
Right.
No, tell me.
Ask that. Can you ask that one more time?
Let's say that Donald Trump changes so that stuff gets manufactured in America for Americans rather than in China. What effect does that have on the environment?
Right.
No, tell me.
No, and I'm just mulling it over, but
Well, shipping, right?
I think, locally in manufacturing areas, they might experience a little bit more pollution, but I'd say overall globally, which is pretty how I'm thinking about this, is it's going to be very helpful globally because you're not going to have to transport all these goods. If we can keep our production more locally, that is definitely one of the best things we can do to limit our environmental impact, without a doubt.
Right. And there's another aspect of it as well. It's not just the transportation. It's also that there's going to be more, and I know this, I spend a lot of time in the environmental industry as an entrepreneur. Like the amount of scrubbers and cleaners on American factories is way more than what you're going to get in China, right? Plus the energy that goes into these factories to produce all of these goods is produced much more cleanly in America than America uses clean coal and China, well, not so much, right? So not only is it the transportation issue, but also it is the fact that the energy that goes into producing the stuff in America is cleaner. The factories themselves are going to be cleaner. So it is a win-win-win on every conceivable dimension. And it means that, of course, if the stuff is produced locally, the footprint is lower on just about every conceivable metric. So there's another example of how Donald Trump's stimulation of the domestic economy at the expense of the overseas economy, however it's going to happen, right? Whether it's free market reforms or whether it's tariffs, probably be some combination and so on. That is going to be absolutely enormously positive for the environment.